So what does this look like, what we're talking about? So I'm going to want to talk about how we talk. I want to talk about difficult conversations. How do you engage with people who are coming from a completely different place than you are? And how do you do that well? So in order to do that, I've got to talk about how conversations work to begin with. And then we'll take a look at some things that we do that can advance conversations, some things that we do that can kill conversations. And this is the reverse of an evangelical sermon, because the passage that I have in mind is James 1, 19 and 20. Anyone know what that text says? Be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, for the anger of man does not accomplish the righteousness of God. I tease people that when the world reads that verse, they have a completely different version of it, okay? We're supposed to be slow to hear, quick to speak, and quick to anger, because the anger of man allows me to vent and tell you what I really think. Okay, so that's the way the world handles James 1, 19 and 20. But if we're going to talk about how we talk and how we engage, then we need to think through how conversations actually work. And what I'm here to tell you is conversations don't work the way we think they work. We think the conversation that we're having is about the topic that we talk about. That's almost never the case. The topic is what we talk about, but there's all kinds of other things going on in a conversation. So let me talk about that for a second. And I have a word for the day. This is like Sesame Street, you know. I tell my wife, teaching adults is like teaching kids. So just, so go back to your Sesame Street days, all right? And the word for today is triphonics, which I'm sure you've used on a regular basis all your life, okay? What in the world is triphonics? Triphonics is the idea that there are three things happening simultaneously in a conversation. Well, it's three things are happening simultaneously. In this case, we're applying it to a conversation. So it's like a variation of, all my illustrations come from growing up before there was technology. So it's like stereo sound or quadraphonic sound. Stereo sound was the idea of different sounds coming out of two speakers that mix in such a way that you get a richness of the sound. Quadraphonic was stereo on steroids. And so 4 different speakers doing the same kind of thing. Well, this is the idea that in any conversation, there are 3 things going on simultaneously. And what you're talking about is just the frosting on the cake. Because what's really going on is what's going on underneath the frosting. And the topic is the frosting. So when we think about conversations, there are 3 things going on. There is the topic that we are discussing. There are the lenses that we use to see what's in front of us. And lenses do 2 things at once. They cause us to focus on certain things, and they also can prevent us from seeing certain things at the same time. That's important. When I illustrate lenses, and I hope I can get away with doing this in Canada, I think I can. When I illustrate lenses, all I have to do is say CNN and Fox. Okay? They're looking at, everybody's got the same reality out there that they're processing, right? But they're each taking it through a set of lenses so that when you hear what it is that they're describing in front of them, you begin to wonder if these 2 groups of people live on the same planet, okay? And that's because of the lenses that they apply to what it is that they see, what they allow to come in and what they don't allow to come in. And lenses are an equal opportunity employer. We all have them, okay? They're just different on different people. So that's important. So the lenses are what we use. The lenses determine what we value oftentimes in what we see in front of us, what we pay attention to and what we tend to ignore, that kind of thing. And then the third part of a conversation is the way my identity and interests are wrapped up in what is being discussed. Most significant conversations are not about the topic that you're discussing. They're about the lenses that are used to discuss it, and they're about the way in which your identity and interests are connected and what you think is at stake in the conversation that you're having. Now, I want to illustrate this. So I'm going to illustrate it this way. I happen to have been born with a gift. At least I think I was born with a gift. The gift was multitasking. Okay, I think I can multitask. Now, most psychologists will tell you no one genuinely is able to multitask, but I have the gift. So I grew up with the gift. My gift of multitasking drove my mother absolutely batty, because I'm also a sports fan, okay? And if you know anything about sports and sports at certain times of the year, this is a good time of year because we got March Madness going on in the United States. And so there are multiple sporting events that can be happening at the same time, you know? So, I mean, today's the beginning of the baseball season. So, you know, that's coming on top of the basketball season. And so I joke with my wife, I'm such a sports fan that I can start at 3 a.m. with Aussie rules football and work my way around the world through the different sports and different leagues. I like cricket, I like basketball, baseball, etc., football. So, you know, I can start in Australia and just follow the sun around the world. And I multitask. So when I was young, I would listen to multiple sporting events at the same time on the radio. And I had radio going for this broadcast and radio going for that broadcast. It drove my mother crazy. Turn that noise down. You can, those of your moms understand what I'm saying, right? And she says, there's no way you can know what's going on. You know, pick one. And I would tell her, okay, this is a really great strategy. I would tell her what the score was in each game. Okay, because I had the gift, okay, and I could do it, okay? And then my wife married the gift. And so I brought my multitasking into my marriage, okay? And this is how multitasking works in a marriage. I'm at a computer, I'm at a screen, I'm concentrating on what I'm doing. You know, it's very, very important what I do, and so I'm concentrating. She walks in and speaks to me and says something to me, and she says, you're not listening to me. And because I have the gift, I can parrot back to her the words, almost word for word, a lot of times, or at least pretty close, to what she said that indicated that whatever waves went through this ear did not go out the other ear on the way, okay? But that something did stick. All right? But there's actually something else going on in that conversation. It has nothing to do with listening. Well, it does, but the identity and interests. Because what I'm hearing when she says you're not listening to me is, you're not a good husband. And what she is saying to me when she says you're not listening is, you do not respect me enough to give me your undivided attention. And you know what? She's right. That's what's going on. And so if you think about it, I'm giving you a twofer in this part of the lecture, okay? Because not only am I talking about cultural engagement, I may be talking about your marriage, okay? So I apologize for stepping all over your relationship right now, but it just might be going on. But here's the point. The stuff that we tend to fight about, that we think about is this, the topic, is actually about other stuff. And that's true in our difficult conversations about things that mean something to all of us. And all of us are invested in public space. So this is often going on in our conversations in public space. So that's important. So then the question becomes, how do I deal with this reality, that this is what's going on? That there's literally, if I can say it this way, metaphorically, there's 2/3 of what's going on you don't see. You see the effects of it, but you don't see. I don't know what's going on in the other person's mind. I may pretend I'm a prophet, okay, but I really don't know what's going on with them unless they tell me. And the same's true of them coming back at me. So a conversation, difficult conversation, is a challenge from the get-go. So here's the question. What kind of listener are you? What kind of listener are you? Are you what I call a rebutter, debater, or a listener? And I will tell you that the church has trained us to be rebutter debaters. I have this assembly of knowledge that I have, this arsenal of facts that I can wield in relationship to someone else, and I'm prepared to do it. So when I hear something that is theologically deficient, a little bell goes off in my head, that little doctrinal meter, bing, 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 bing. You better address this. You better address this. That was false. Okay? All right, that does things to you. Okay? So you can tell whether you're a good listener or not in a simple way, and it's this. As you're listening to someone and you hear something you don't agree with, are you forming a rebuttal, or are you asking, where did that come from? If I'm a listener, I want to know where that comes from. I don't want to assume that I know. I want to probe it. I want to get a sense of where the other person is and what's really motivating them to say the thing that they're talking about. I'm trying to work down from the frosting down into the cake and see what the base of the cake is about. So I tell people, when you're engaged in a difficult conversation with someone coming from a different place than you are, you take off your rebutter and debater mode, because the first thing to do in any conversation to advance it is to make sure you're understanding what you're talking about. And by understanding what you're talking about, I'm not just talking about understanding the topic. I'm talking about understanding where the person is coming from that you're having the discussion with. And there's a difference between understanding and assessment. And I do a better job of assessing if I've done a better job of understanding. Because I not only understand what the position of the person is, I may get to understand the whys and the wherefores of why they hold it, which is actually the more important thing to know. So I tell people, when you're in a difficult conversation, turn yourself into a listener initially. Ask a lot of questions. Get that spiritual GPS reading on where they are coming from, why, what's in the background, etc. Illustration. My grandmother-in-law grew up in a Christian home. Her father was a very regular attending, I'm almost afraid to say this in this environment, Baptist, okay? All right? Very, on the surface, God-fearing person, only there was one problem. He was abusive. It's worth it for me to know that that's in my grandmother-in-law's background before I talk to her about Christianity. Because for her, the first word that pops into her mind when she hears Christianity is hypocrite. I need to know that if I can discover it, because then I know that there are certain lenses. She has certain phaser shields. Everyone does Star Wars when we talk spiritually. Okay? You say certain things and phaser shields go up. You say the word sin. They don't hear the word sin. They hear the word sin. And the phaser shields go up. I've seen it. So phaser shields go up. That doesn't mean that you don't use the word, but you better get to a place where you define what you mean when you use it so that the phaser shield that's gone up doesn't go up. I was in a conversation yesterday with an Uber driver. We were talking about the state of the world, et cetera, when he found out I taught at a seminary, and so we were off and running. And we were talking about the state of the world, how everyone does their own thing, et cetera, and how selfish people are. And I let this go on for about 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes, and then finally I said, you know what the Bible calls that? The Bible calls that sin. He had already put on the table what the problem of humanity was. I didn't have to surface it. Okay, I'm in a different place. If I had brought it up initially right at the beginning, okay, it would have been a different conversation. About halfway through, he says, you're interesting to talk to. I'm going, oh, that's good. He asked me about my podcast. I'm going to listen when he dropped me off. I'm going to listen to your podcast. And I'm sitting here going, well, that was a nice Uber drive. Okay? So it's a therapy session I paid for, okay? So it does things. There's a way in. If you think about how you engage by thinking about where is that person coming from as we talk about this topic. That's what you're after. So be a listener rather than a butter. Be slow to speak, quick to hear, and slow to anger. Now, let me talk about 5 things that we do that sabotage conversations. Okay? That red light is up there for a reason. Don't do these things. But I will tell you, we do them. We do them all the time. And what's even worse is they are exemplified for us 24/7 in our public space. The moment I start to go through this, you will recognize the things that I'm talking about. And if you ever turn on your television to listen to public discourse in the public space, you will see these being done by people who are supposed to model and show us the way and who are supposed to be our leaders. Here's the first one, what I call the quick confession or pivot. Here's what the quick confession or pivot is. Someone brings up something in the conversation that you know is a weakness or a problem in your own view. They've legitimately brought it up. They've raised it for you. It's something that deserves attention, but you know that's not the space you want to be talking in. By the way, I was taught the pivot by public relations people that the seminary hired for us to, a lot of us who do a lot of public speaking, for us to do, and I do a lot of interviews. And so I got PR special training about how to deal with the space when someone goes to a place. You don't want the conversation to go there. You've got your own talking points. So what do? So this is the pivot. Pivot comes in 2 forms, okay? The nicer form is what is called the quick confession, followed immediately by a but, okay? So yes, I recognize that as a problem, but what about? It's also sometimes called whataboutism. Okay? And that's the pivot. And the goal is to try and get the discussion talking about the thing you want to talk about and not the thing they want to talk about. If you actually think about what the pivot is, it's actually very disrespectful. Because it's basically saying, I don't want to talk about what you want to talk about. Let's call it. Now, the quicker form of it that you sometimes see, and politicians are really good at this, is a reporter will ask a question, they won't even answer the question, they'll just go right to their talking point. Well, let me say this to you, or look. You want to hear the word look to start an answer? Okay, look means don't look there, look over here. Okay, all right, so you're pivoting. You're taking the discussion to a place you want it to go because you want to control that conversation. You don't want to let them contribute to the conversation. It's actually very disrespectful. Second is what I call demonization, okay? This is debate by label, okay? You know this. Virtually every political ad you see on television is full of the devil. It's using this, and it's an equal opportunity employer. The things that I am talking about are not things the left does to the right or the right does to the left. We all do it. We all dance this dance. And I also call it the exorcism. Okay, because this is how it works. You label someone in order to do this. You want to bury them. You don't want to discuss the substance of the point that is in front of you. You just want to label them as something that is draped in black and deserves to be dismissed so that you don't have to go through the detail of the argument. It's an equal opportunity employer. Let me show you how it works. L. You know what L stands for? Liberal. C. You know what C stands for? Conservative. S, socialist. M, Marxist. F, fundamentalist. Another C might be just Christian all by itself. Okay, we do it. We label people, and the function of the label is not to engage in a conversation. It is to be dismissive. It also is disrespectful. The third one is what I call motive assignment. Grading papers yesterday, I had students who were attributing motives to people who were skeptical. I said, I tend not to want to discuss motive unless I know what the motive is. Because when you engage in motive assessment, that assumes that you have earned a certain credential. And that credential is you are a prophet. You can read minds. And if you are wrong about the motive assessment, guess what you've just done? You've just slandered somebody. So, motive assessment. We often engage in motive assessment. I'd rather stay on the level of let's just sort it out in terms of what the contents of the discussion are. I'm not going to worry about your motives. I hope you won't worry about mine. I'm going to assume we're in a sincere conversation unless I get some indication otherwise, and especially if it's self-confessed. Fourth, never surrender. Go into the conversation with a commitment that you're not giving ground, because I can't lose. In a discussion, our public discussions today have generally dissolved down to being binary in nature, no nuance, no gray. Okay, it's all this is all good and that is all bad. I don't care what you put in that slot. Okay, that's the way we have our discussions. There's no acknowledgement that maybe someone is raising something from the other side that deserves attention. There's no acknowledgement of that. It gets labeled and dismissed, usually demonized. Okay, I'm not going to give any ground because I can't look like I'm losing. There's too much at stake. Never surrender. And then raw tribalism. I got to defend my tribe no matter what. This is the one on which the Christian church is choking currently. I'm talking about us in the United States. I am watching people defend things today from people who they support, who 10 years ago they would have condemned because it was coming from someone else on the other side of the political spectrum. And that's raw tribalism. And raw tribalism is poisonous. It is destructive. Because it reinforces stereotypes, and those stereotypes stick. And they stick with some measure of credibility when we are hypocritical. Watch out for tribalism. We talked earlier about the Pharisees. The Pharisees were, at least on the surface, theoretically well-motivated. They wanted to stand up and honor God. That's what they were committed to doing. They thought they were the representatives of God. They thought they represented righteousness. They thought they had it all together. They thought they were the good tribe. And the one thing they didn't have is what they needed. They didn't know how to be self-critical. We have to be self-critical. Because our theology says not that we are perfect, but that we are being sanctified. And if I'm being sanctified and growing in righteousness. I haven't arrived yet. There are things for me to learn, etc. So you want to be careful of tribalism that is devoid of being self-critical. And when it insists that you shouldn't be self-critical, you know you've crossed the line. So that's the bad news. Let's talk about the things that can help a conversation. Let's talk about the things that will serve us well. First of all, it's okay to be vulnerable. I've already said none of us is perfect. The commitment, the great line of the Reformation is always reforming. Remember that line? Always reforming. Okay, now I think what always reforming means that you are constantly being transformed and you are constantly dealing with changes that you're bringing into your life to conform you more and more to Jesus Christ. The word change should be a positive word when it's going in the right direction and not a negative one. And yet in some Christian churches, the word change is like a 4-letter word. Doesn't make sense in relationship to our theology. So be vulnerable about your own stuff. It's very, very important. That humility gives room to the other person to do the same. Part of what I'm saying to you is this, that when you walk into a conversation and you display some of the virtues that I'm going to be talking about, you give the person space to treat you in a similar way and to respond to you in a similar way. That's extremely important in these conversations. When I make the effort to be a good listener and to ask questions and to probe and to take the time to hear someone else's story and what drives them and to do so with respect, guess what? It's going to become my turn at some point. And I am hoping and praying that because I have responded that way to them, they will be open to respond that way to me. And that I've modeled the kind of conversation that we can have with one another. That's first, be vulnerable. Be curious with open ears. That's the questions part. Be curious. See if ask yourself, might there be something in what they're saying? I may not agree with the whole package of what they're saying, but might there be something in what they're saying that is worth paying attention to? Be curious with open ears. Stick to the issues. Don't get into ad hominems. Don't get into labeling. Just stick to the issues. Be humble. Now, everything that I said up to the point, you might be thinking, in fact, some of the questions were sort of going in this way already. So I'm pretty confident I'm leaving this vibe, which I don't want to leave, which is, so you don't fight back. You don't challenge. Okay, I am not saying that. I am not, that was emphatic, saying that. When I say be respectfully honest, what I'm referring to is stand up for your convictions, but do it with respect. State about where you're coming from and why, but do it wisely, intelligently. Do it in a way that because you've made the effort to understand where the other person is coming from, you might actually sense they have some values that you can connect to, that you can respond with as you make your case, and or you might have to be honest at some point and say, we just really disagree here. But do it respectfully. Be respectfully honest. Parse issues. I'm going to talk more about this. This is the ability to sort out and get away from the binary, to actually sort out the conversation, that there are some things in the conversation coming from the other side that might be worth reflecting on. I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. And then here's what you're looking for when you're doing this and trying to advance a conversation. You're trying to see if perhaps there are shared values and or gospel openings about life choices and issues of location in which they may have a value that you share, they just apply it differently than you do. And so your response may be, you know what, you care about, let's say justice. You care about justice, so do I. You apply it this way, okay? And I think I understand why that might be, okay? And I can appreciate at least an aspect of that kind of an application. But I also think justice involves this other thing. And here's why, but you see what you've done? You've made an effort to connect and differentiate at the same time, which can be helpful in these kinds of conversations. So let me come back to parsing, because parsing is tricky. I'm going to submit to you that in the public square, there are three kinds of public issues. Okay, this may be something we end up discussing down the road. But I fundamentally think there are three kinds of issues. There are what I call genuine worldview clashes. Now, let me tell you what I mean. Okay, because there is a fundamental worldview clash about whether you think God exists or not that is basic and that funnels through all this. But I'm thinking about the issues themselves. So there are fundamental worldview clashes. That is, the starting points coming from both sides of the conversation are so opposite of one another, so defined with such difference from one another, there's very little common ground to seek. So let me give you the two issues that I think belong in this category. The discussion on abortion belongs in this category, and the discussion on same-sex marriage belongs in this category. Okay. I think those are worldview clashes. I think these are the hardest discussions to have with someone that you disagree with. Because you're debating about the source of life and the beginning of life. And you have two radically different starting points. God's responsible for the creation of life. He's responsible for the creation of life from the very beginning when it happens. In fact, now we're even debating about what happens with in vitro fertilization. Okay? The clock just keeps moving back. Okay, it's a legitimate conversation, and other people say, no, it isn't until the child's viable or whatever, they'll move it on down the road. Just very, very difficult because of the different starting place. Same-sex marriage, same problem. We've got issues of gender now that we're discussing that we were never dream of discussing years ago. I can tell you a story. It's 1984. Okay, I've just graduated along with some of my colleagues from Aberdeen. One of my Aberdeen colleagues ended up in California in the Presbyterian Church. Okay, and I'm in Texas. Okay, California and Texas, two states, part of the same union, but very different states. And so he's in California, and his wife writes my wife. They were close. This was their closest friend when we were in Scotland. He said, Sally, I want to write you a question. He said, we had an elder who's undergoing a sex change operation. He wants to remain on the board. What should we do? And she's right, she says, I want to know if Darrell discussed this in seminary, because Chuck at the seminary he went didn't discuss this. So he has no guidance for how to think about this. What do y'all say? And as she's writing the letter, she's wrestling with, in the middle of the letter, she says, I don't know what pronoun to use. 1984, okay? That was so out in the outer stratosphere. You know, of course, we wrote back and said, well, of course, we discussed this never. Didn't come up. Wasn't even on the radar screen. Look where we are today. Just very different. Choice about morality, very different. Someone doesn't believe in God and doesn't have a morality. Hard thing is, they got a lot of options. Second category, shared goal, different paths. Okay, this is in some ways the easiest of the three, although it ends up being hard for reasons I'm going to illustrate. So what belongs in this category? Racial reconciliation belongs in this category. If I walk out on the street and ask people, just as a matter of principle, should the races be reconciled to one another and live in reconciliation with one another, I will get yeses, almost without exception. Okay, I will get a very high number. I will get such high numbers that politicians will go, I'd like that approval number. The next question is where the debate comes. So how do we do it? Okay, but at least we recognize we're trying to get to the same place. Okay, so that's a different kind of discussion than people who are starting out on completely different ends of a spectrum. That's the second kind of public issue. The third kind of public issue is what I call solid values in conflict. And I want to think about this theologically. Because here's the premise. The premise is we live in a fallen and dysfunctional world. Does that sound like an odd theological premise? We live in a fallen and dysfunctional world, which means as a corollary that sometimes you can have biblical values that are colliding because they're operating dysfunctionally. Did you hear that? That's important. You can have values that are colliding because we're operating dysfunctionally. They're in the space, and they're in the space in different ways with different concerns, and so they're colliding with one another. And then this is what happens politically because we think binarily. One political party will grab one virtue and say, here I plant my flag, I can do no other. And the other political party will come along and pick the other virtue that's in dysfunctional relationship to, here I plant my flag, I can do no other. And you end up with a binary conflict and a hesitation to discuss or recognize the value that's coming from the other side because you picked this value as the value that counts. And so you either minimize or try and reduce the pressure that the other value is bringing to the discussion. I submit to you that most of our discussion in public space is in category 3 because we live in a fallen world. So you ask me, what example? All kinds of examples. Okay? Immigration is an example of that. Country has a right to decide what kind of society it's going to be, expect its laws to be followed and that kind of thing. But there also are demands, moral demands on people, at least if they're biblically oriented, to have some sense of compassion and mercy. Those collide sometimes. So the trick is to have a conversation in which, and here's a key word, in which you calibrate the relationship of the values that are in tension with each other. But if your view is to view it as a binary and say, here I put my flag, I can do no other, you're not going to engage in that conversation because you're going to be giving ground or surrendering or whatever. So that's how you parse issues. If you have this model of thinking about this, you have opened yourself up to the possibility of thinking that I can hear something coming from someone else who has a different worldview, and yet there may be something worth hearing in what they're saying to me. You are parsing the issue. And that can be important in these kinds of public discussions because we share public space together. Let me give you another idea that should give you pause. In public space, as we define it, your religion, I hate to inform you, means nothing. Here's what I'm saying. When you're at the table of public space with the laws that run, and this is true in Canada as well as in the United States, all citizens have the same rights no matter what their religion is or their lack of religion. So that means when I come to the table, how do I come to the table? Do I come to the table as a citizen, one among many who I recognize is made up of a plurality of worldviews, or do I come to the table with a sense of this has got to be a Christian country and a Christian nation and a sense of privilege that negates the way the space is defined? Because the only way I think you can bring your Christian convictions to that table is to engage in an attempt to persuade people who aren't where you are that this is still best for them. And that's a harder conversation. Let me say it another way. I've got an idea in the back of my head I want to go back to, and I don't want to lose it, but I'm afraid I may lose it. I'll just tell you that ahead of time. Telling you what's going on inside of me, it's not good. Okay? In fact, let me go there so that I don't. A second issue that shows these values besides immigration is gun control. Okay? Gun control is another example. I ought to be able to protect my home. I ought to be able to protect my space. I ought to be able to protect my family, etc. But the abuse of guns is a problem, in case you haven't noticed. The abuse of that power is a problem in our society. And if I take an all or nothing approach to gun control, okay, we're going to continue to see what we've seen, which is more tragedy. Now, let me go back to where we were. The point in thinking through these issues in this kind of way is to actually weigh the way you think about your public space convictions. And I'm going to give you a scale. It's going to have 4 parts, okay? So, and how many of you, I'm at a seminary, so I think I can get away with this conversation. How many of you are at seminary or have been to seminary where you've studied Greek? Okay, look at that. Wow, okay. So when you studied Greek, there was this thing called the apparatus, right? This is so much fun, I can actually use this illustration, okay? All right, there's a thing called a textual apparatus, right? And if you have the UBS text, that textual apparatus had a little rating system. Remember, it was A, B, C, and D. Okay, A, B, C, and D meant A, we're certain this is the wording, this is a famous variant, but it has no chance. B, there's a little bit of disagreement here, but we really think we're confident of the text. C is, this is the text that we printed, but it could be that one of the variants is right. And D means we had to put something in the text because we don't know. Okay, all right, so that's the way that scale works when it's talking about the text in the New Testament. All right, you ought to think about your public space beliefs in the same kind of way. A, I am so certain of this, I would argue with God about it. Okay, all right? Now that's a pretty high category. All right? I am so certain of this, I would argue with God about it. Now, you can laugh, but Peter had that category. Okay? Peter argued with Jesus that he wasn't going to suffer, right? And he argued with the vision about his meal. Okay? So Peter had that category. Sad thing was, he was wrong twice. Okay? All right? So that's A. B, I know there's a disagreement. I'm pretty confident I'm right. C, if we get to heaven and I figure out that you're right, I won't be surprised. I'm just being honest with you. Okay? That's part of, by the way, that's part of what it means to be vulnerable about your own views. And then D is, let's be honest and flip a coin, neither of us knows. Okay? That's a scale. That's not boxes, that's a scale. And if you'll think about the decisions that you make in the debates that you have in this kind of way, you will get a sense of how tenaciously you should hold to certain aspects and arguments that you engage in the public square. That's part of what I'm talking about when I talk about parse issues. Now let me bring up a few other things and then we'll have some question time. We need to learn to recognize we all make judgments about what to prioritize. And then in many cases, core identity concerns and interests drive the judgments that motivate our choices. It's because we believe deeply there's something significantly at stake that we hold on to what we hold on tenaciously. And we may be totally right about that. Okay, and that's not a criticism, that's an observation. I'm trying in what I'm doing in this lecture to be as descriptive as possible about what goes on. Okay, I'm not trying to be prescriptive as much as descriptive about the dynamics of what it is that we're talking about. Listening helps us to see what is driving someone else and therefore inevitably makes for a better conversation. So listening is worth it. And then third, when you do this, it builds respect and trust. That's what it does. It builds respect and trust. And if you treat someone this way and bring this tone and approach to the conversation, you may initially get pushback because they're coming with, usually maybe coming with baggage about what they think about Christians and that kind of thing. You may initially get pushback, but if you will persist and not succumb, you have the chance to create a different conversation for your conversations in which you both might benefit because you may each learn something from the other. You have to hold out that possibility that there could be some sliver of what is coming from the other position that's worth paying attention to, that it might result in a little tweak in how you think about the area, and that might benefit you. Okay. So that's difficult conversations. I have another slide, but I'm going to defer part of it because I'm going to talk about Romans 1 versus Acts 17 in the next lecture. Because usually when I do this thing, I only do 2 of these, I don't do 4. So you're getting some new stuff and I'm having to shuffle over. This slide says, Paul, Romans 1 and Acts 17, that's a teaser, okay? That's coming. But I do want to make this point about the early church. I often, when I speak on this, and I do, when I'm discussing a text that comes from the early church, I said we need to go back to the future. The way we need to think about how we think about our public square engagement and what the future holds for the church, we need to go back and see how the church did it. Because the church had no social power, no cultural power, no political power. The only power they had was spiritual power, and they exercised it. And they did pretty well. So when we try and cling to those other 3 things at the expense of the spiritual dynamic that is the soul of the church, we get off track. And the last point I want to make comes from that theological work, the Broadway play, Hamilton. There's a song early on in that play where Aaron Burr is meeting Alexander Hamilton for the first time, and he's giving Hamilton advice. And there's a little song, I will hum it, sort of, okay? Don't consider this singing, all right? But it goes, talk less, smile more. Okay, you know that song? Some of you know that song. Talk less, smile more. I want to tweak it for the church. Talk less, show more. When the Bible calls on the people of God to be a light, what is being asked for is that we show the character of God. And in the passage where we're called to be light, right next door to it is the call to love our enemy. And in the call to love our enemy is this remark that comes with it. By this, you will show you are sons of God. Whoa. We are to be imitators of the character of God. And now I'm back to, this is normally where I do the John 3:16 thing. God so loved the world that he gave. We should do that, not just in everything that we do. We should do that in our conversations.
Okay, any questions? Thank you, Dr. Bock.
So thank you for your presentation. I noticed in your presentation that, a lot of your discussion about the kinds of conversations we're having depend on a certain depth of relationship when engaging in the conversation. So how do we apply these principles when you wind up in conversations where you might only know the other person via Twitter avatar, or you just know one thing about them, this is the first time, and you engage in a public space and you don't know them at all, and maybe you don't have the time or space to get into the
It's a great question, and you're raising the whole area of social media, et cetera. And not only do you not know the person you're interacting with, but what's even worse is you don't know the audience that's actually looking at the conversation you're having with that person. So the problem's multiple. I think what I want to do is I want to defer a question on the whole role of social media until we get to our final question and answer time, because that is its own separate discussion. And I'll just give you the short answer right now. And the short answer right now is the longer I'm around social media, the less I use it for this kind of thing. Okay? Yeah.
Anyone else?
Some people accuse me of not being guilty of long answers. We're good?
I'll jump in.
Okay, good.
So in the context of cultural engagement, I'm curious your thoughts around, we're talking about conversations for the most part. What about the arts? What about creativity?
Oh, great. Thank you. So let me tell you another thing we do at the center. Every year at the center, I and the media arts people take a group of students to the Sundance Film Festival. We do it for two reasons. One, if you want a lens into what the culture is thinking, generally, look at the arts. I'm not talking about the arts that are coming out of people just trying to generate and earn money. I'm talking about serious arts, people who are writing things and they have things they are trying to say, not just entertain by what they are doing. And Sundance is a great place for that. It's a way of getting a heartbeat of what the culture is about. And every year there's a little different feel to what happens there. But there are issues that you watch people wrestle with issues that are just as life challenging as anything we talk about in the church. So let me give you a handful of examples. In 2023 when we went, and in 2022 when it was under COVID and no one went, we all did it by Zoom, most of the shows dealt with the area of reconciliation and diversity in one way or another. We knew that was on the hearts of people and what they were thinking about and how they were thinking about it, et cetera. This last year when we went, the major theme was family. Okay, it was so different and so interesting to see people outside the church struggling with and wanting to connect with and identify with issues tied to family. Now let me tell you how they did it, because this is also interesting. One of the documentary that won one of the awards for the entire film festival was a film called Daughters. It was about Black children whose fathers were in prison. And there was a ministry that developed, a ministry of public service, like kind of a combination of the two, that developed a father-daughter dance in the prison so that the daughters could connect to their fathers. And it walked us through the journey of the preparation for that event, and then the aftermath. And a part of the story was there was a lack of follow-up on the other end. There would be this connection at the dance, but the prison system wasn't equipped to follow up with what that represented and the opportunity. But what it also showed is there were certain prisoners who were there for very serious crimes who, as a result of that experience and taking on the identity of I'm a father to this child, turned around in their attitude in prison. And the documentary was about that. It demonstrated, it showed it. I'm sitting here going, man, that's powerful. So we take, because we're not only trying to see what the culture is wrestling with, and usually when we engage with the world from the church, we engage strictly negatively. This is what's wrong with the culture. We're trying to teach our students to see what the culture is struggling with and what they're groping towards. And because we think the gospel goes into that space very, very clearly. And so if we can help people identify that and know how to have those conversations that are not so much confrontational as we're going to come alongside, because this is a good virtue that you're pursuing, okay? That's what we want to see. So yes, the arts is very, and people, I hate to inform you that people are influenced by what goes on in the arts. Arts is a far more powerful cultural shaper today than the church. So we need to have some awareness of what's going on there. At least some of us do, and be committed to it. So I'm grateful you asked that question. It's an important question.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bock.
You're very welcome.
I would like to ask now Bob Callanan, who is our interim president, to come and share some things with you.
Let me start by just thanking each of you who have come for being here. Sitting amongst you, it just reinforces to me how powerful it is to our students, our staff, those of the faculty that are here, to be able to minister and think today with a larger group. There's a different dynamic, and I thank you for your participation. What an unanticipated privilege it has been to serve the students, the staff, and the faculty here over the last almost 6 months now. Many of you who I've talked to will have heard this, but 6 months, and I think literally about 3 weeks ago now, when someone called me and asked me about serving in this capacity, my verbatim quote was, "I am reasonably certain that you have confused my name with someone else's resume." And but what a joy it's been to be here. I just want to bring you a bit of an update on kind of where we're at. We have the privilege this term of serving 313 different students across the college and the seminary. We went through a pretty intense fall semester. We had a visit from the ABHE. I did not know what an ABHE was before I got here, and went through an accreditation, and praise the Lord, we just learned in February that we were given another 10-year accreditation term. And so we're just so grateful for that. Because it's true that no good deed goes unpunished, we are now going through an ATS seminary accreditation. Dr. Housen and I and others are busy writing the self-study document. I've done some really brain-damaging things in my life, but there's nothing quite like going through one of those. But pray for us as we move towards a visit from the ATS group in November of this coming year, and we pray that we'll have a similar outcome. As you drove in, you probably saw the seminary building looking different than it was if you've been here some months ago. The progress on that has been spectacular. The winter was very, very good for us. In fact, I was talking to one of the hard-bitten contractors on site a week ago, and he said, where it was very cold last week, "If this is what spring is like, can we have winter back, please?" But we're looking forward, hopefully, to being able to utilize that space beginning in January of 2025. And we're thankful to the Lord for just the excellent work that the people we have who are representing us are doing on the project, and the contractor has been amazing. So it's something to be thankful for. We're seeing some really exciting trends in recruitment for the fall 2024 class. And I'm just going to give you one snippet into it. And I'm nervous about this. Dr. Bock, you talked about baseball analogies. I feel a bit like I'm talking about a no-hitter in the bottom of the 8th inning, and I probably shouldn't do that. But we've chatted with 209, this will be just at the college level, 209 different individuals who have indicated interest in the school. And out of that 209 so far, there are more than 90 who have submitted an application. There are 53 that we would call top end. Now, what top end means is they've submitted the application and they're more than 70% of the way through, or they've completed it, or we've reviewed it, and or they've been accepted and confirmed they're coming. What's important about that number is we didn't get as high as that at all last year. Last year we got up to 49, and we didn't get to 49 until June 15th. So the Lord's been gracious, and the recruiting team is doing an excellent job, and we're praying that there'll be a really, really solid, large, enthusiastic first-year freshman class next year in the college. So be praying about that. We're beginning to move into fairly high gear in the search for a permanent president. I think of it as a re-retirement for me. In fact, next week, I think we begin as a search committee to interview some candidates. The Lord's been gracious in raising a number of individuals, and we're excited about the caliber of individuals who have expressed interest in serving the school in that capacity. So there's four things I'd love for you to take away and be praying about. The first, obviously, is the enrollment I talked about. Pray that one of the things that hit me when I was kind of here for maybe 2 weeks, it hit me all of a sudden. I went, oh yeah, nothing happens in this place except the Spirit of God moves. And there's no student who comes here because they're wanting to look particularly cool in the eyes of their friends who went to secular university. There's no staff who work here because they thought it was a way to get rich. And there's no faculty who serve here because in the eyes of the world, they want to be seen as someone who's really academically clever. They come here because the Spirit has moved them. They've prepared for it. And we need the Spirit to be working in the lives of the potential students who are thinking about coming here, and in the lives of their friends and family who are positive influencers. So be praying about that. Be praying about the search for a new leader. We just really desire that the Lord would be working now, even He knows who that person is, to be working in their hearts and preparing them. But more than that, preparing those of us here who will serve alongside that individual so that we can really form that team that propels the school into the future. Thirdly, I think just pray for the engagement of God's people. I'm so delighted that each of you are here and have come. It's oftentimes a difficult day to do this the day before Good Friday, but I appreciate your willingness to do it. Think about how you could find ways to identify others who could be engaged with the school. You know, when I was here in the fall and we had heritage preaching lectures, this is like going to be full disclosure, practicing being vulnerable. The night before preaching lectures, I went, hey Bob, when's the last time you sat through what the equivalent of 4 sermons in a day? Suck it up, it's your job. Go and do it. 10 minutes from the end, it was a high bar I'm setting for you, I'm sorry. 10 minutes from the end of the last session, I found myself grieving that there wasn't an additional session. And then my next thought was, how come, as a believer in Christ, attending a church 5 minutes up the road, this is the first time I've sat through this? I need to be more engaged. And I may be the poster child for it, but I'm not the only one. We need to find ways that there are more people who know about the school, more people who could understand that they love what the school does, more people who would engage in prayer, who would be people who would talk to others about the school, and who would invest in the school. And so be praying about that. And then the final thing is just pray that we here at the school would be faithful. One of the things that's become apparent, and we've talked about often as a team, is if we are faithful, and in this context, I mean, if we pursue excellence in what we do, the Lord will honor that. We don't get to tell Him how that honoring looks like, but He will honor it, and it will be good. And so pray for us that we be faithful in what we do. Thank you again for being here today, and that we so enjoy your presence. Thanks.